Painkiller is a quintessential heavy metal album.
A killer metal album.
And even today, decades later, it still represents everything metal stands for.
Can you believe that?
So today, let's kick off the series of videos in honor of its 35th anniversary and talk about a not-so-secret weapon that has actually made Painkiller the album we know it for today. Here you go. Guys, real quick, just wanted to apologize for the entourage in this video, which is quite different from our regular ones, and it is so because I'm traveling right now. But nevertheless, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Defenders of the Faith series is, of course, to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. In 1983, Judas Priest were out on the road with their massive World Vengeance tour. And so on January 7th of that year, Judas Priest played a show in Hampton, Virginia. After which, one of the fans, just like it usually happens at rock concerts, even today, tried to locate anyone from the band. You know, like lots of people do to this very day. And like, if we're being very honest, yours truly also did several times back in the day. But this local kid wasn't exactly your casual fan, even though he was a lifelong Judas Priest follower. And after he finally was lucky enough to find Glenn Tipton in one of the local bars, talking up a waitress, just like you would expect a rock star to behave back in the 1980s. Although he did, of course, ask for the legendary guitarist's autograph, that wasn't exactly the reason why he tried to find the legendary Glenn Tipton. And actually, funny enough, to this very day, he has no idea where that autograph even went to. As unlike many other fans, he wasn't there for a picture or any kind of memorabilia. And so after breaking the ice, striking a conversation with Glenn and showing him the pictures of his own drum kit, he finally found the courage within himself to ask that one question that was the actual reason of why he was looking for a Judas Priest member that night. The question of how does Glenn Tipton actually feel about playing together with their drummer Dave Holland. To which Glenn, after not thinking too much, simply said, "It's fine."
I'm fine. Really?
Thus crashing our protagonist's dreams of a fairy tale story in which he would become the rightful drummer of his favorite heavy metal band. Interestingly enough, years later, that same guy actually told Glenn Tipton the story, which, of course, Glenn had no recollection of whatsoever. Because for Glenn Tipton, back in 1983, he was just yet another kid, asking for an autograph and telling his amazing musical story. You know, just regular random kid from Norfolk, Virginia, whose name happens to be Scott Travis. A few years after that meeting, Scott Travis relocated to Los Angeles, California. And there, in the City of Angels, in 1986, the young drummer joined his first big band, Racer X, a technical speed metal outfit featuring future Mick Biggs virtuoso shredder Paul Gilbert on the guitar. Now, I just have to point out that although Racer X was Scott's first major act, in reality, by 1986, he had been a member of quite many other outfits. But that, I believe, is a topic for an absolutely different video. So if you would like me to release a special episode on Scott's biography, and specifically on his history before joining Judas Priest, please let me know in the comments. But either way, this album has gotten a lot of positive critical response, with some reviewers specifically praising Scott's work, and even more. After the release of Second Heat, AllMusic's reviewer Andy Hens named Travis and bassist John Alberto one of the most formidable rhythm sections around. Which, by the way, for the record, I have to point out that was absolutely justified. But at the same time, despite finally landing a major gig, and despite all of the success the Second Hit got for Racer X and for Scott Travis, our protagonist wasn't exactly too happy with his position, as down deep in his heart, the only band he always wanted to play for still was Judas Priest. And even more, just a couple of weeks before he finally moved out from Virginia to California, and roughly 3 years after his first attempt to land a gig with Judas Priest, Scott actually tried it out once again during the band's Turbo tour. As pretty much every Judas Priest fan knows the story about how Scott Travis famously set up his drum kit in a parking lot before a Judas Priest concert in Virginia and blasted Judas Priest tunes in his attempt for the band to finally notice him. A story which is, well, almost true. Because on one hand, yes, Scott actually wanted to do that, but at the same time, if we're being very honest, he never actually went through with that idea. And the only thing he actually did back in 1986 during the Turbo tour was passing tapes of him performing Judas Priest songs through a friend of a friend of a friend who had an in with the band. The tapes which sadly never actually made it to neither Glenn Tipton nor to KK Downing. At least so they say.
Heavy metal rules, and Madonna can go to hell as far as I'm concerned. She's a dick.
So yes, despite the whole fact that deep down in his heart he still wanted to be a Judas Priest drummer and a Judas Priest drummer only, back in 1986, Scott Travis had finally landed on his feet. And interestingly enough, it is then, when he actually stopped trying, that he had finally gotten what he wants, as the critical acclaim and the recognition were not the only things Scott had got while being at Racer X. One of the band members, Jeff Martin, was a friend of Judas Priest Rob Halford, and while they were working on a joint project, he finally heard that Dave Holland was leaving the band. After which, without any hesitations, Martin called Travis and asked him, "Guess who needs a drummer?" And so, just like that, in November of 1989, Scott Travis finally got what he dreamt of for his entire life: an audition for Judas Priest. As Scott recalls, Judas Priest gave him some classic songs to learn for the audition, including the Green Militia, You've Got Another Thing Coming, and The Ripper. The songs which he actually didn't even have to learn, as by 1989 he had been playing those for pretty much his entire life. And in more. As a die-hard Judas Priest fan, during that audition, he randomly started blasting some other tunes, including Exciter and The Tyrant, which of course was done simply to impress the legendary Judas Priest, and which it looks like he definitely succeeded in.
What does it mean for me? It means an opportunity to play with a band that I've admired for many, many years.
Right at the end of the audition, Judas Priest gave Scott a cassette tape and asked to go on and study some newer songs. The songs that even Scott did not hear by then, as those of course were the tapes of the early demo versions of the songs which would eventually land on the band's 12th studio album. An album on which Judas Priest simply had to turn things around if they wanted to survive. And both KK Downing and Glenn Tipton, the two masterminds behind the instrumental part of the Judas Priest sound, did understand that they simply could not do that without a drummer of an absolutely different caliber. As here's the thing, on May 13th, 1988, Judas Priest released their 11th studio album, Ram It Down, which, although did receive a gold status in the United States, at the same time did get some mixed responses, including AllMusic's Steve Huey writing that this album was too polished and had a mechanical sound and production, especially with the drums. And which, despite the whole fact that I simply love Ram It Down, and it is no secret for anyone who follows our Defenders of the Faith series that I will defend this album until the day I die, I simply can't not agree with. As it was on Ram It Down when Judas Priest simply started experimenting with drum machines and programming. And although it was the album on which Judas Priest finally returned to their double bass patterns, at the same time, those patterns weren't exactly recorded in the same manner as all of the band's other albums were. Right?
Same, but different. But still same.
And so naturally, Judas Priest wanted, and they needed, Painkiller to be something else, to sound like something else. And we all know that they achieved exactly that. In In January of 1990, just 2 months after Scott Travis's audition for Judas Priest, the band entered the Miraval Studios in Paris to start the recordings of Painkiller. And this time around, everything was different. This was the very first album since 1976, Sad Wings of Destiny, on which Judas Priest did not collaborate with a longtime producer Tom Allen, and instead decided to go with the mighty Chris Tsangarides, who, by the way, was an assistant engineer on Sad Wings of Destiny almost 25 years earlier. But most importantly, it was the album on which Judas Priest finally did something what this band's fans had always expected from them. And instead of going with the most commercial and the most selling sound, once again decided to reinvent themselves and push their sound to absolutely new boundaries. Whether it was in the complexity of guitar parts, Rob Halford's voice, or Ian Hill's and now their new drummer's Scott Travis's rhythm section, which together resulted in an absolute metal meltdown. But at the same time, here's the thing. It is now that we all, of course, know Scott Travis to be the legendary Judas Priest drummer, but back in 1990, this wasn't exactly the case yet. And for all the die-hard Judas Priest fans at that time, Dave Holland was the drum machine behind the kit of Judas Priest. And he was responsible for some of the best metal albums out there. And so, in order to introduce their new band members, Judas Priest had to do something extraordinary. As the truth is that after the several experiments they did on Turbo and Ram It Down, this band simply had no right to miss. And in addition to the whole fact that Scott Travis always dreamt of creating a legendary signature drum intro, you know, something similar to Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll or Van Halen's Hot for Teacher, it was basically now or never, both for Scott Travis and for the metal gods. Although, if we're being very honest, a couple of years before that, he actually almost did that with Racer X's Scarified, which, for the record, I think is simply a kick-ass song. But nevertheless, just like all of the great ideas and most of the legendary songs, an accident came to Scott Travis's help. As one time, during a warm-up exercise in the studio, while engineers were simply testing drum microphones, Scott Travis was simply experimenting by combining several different drum licks he used to practice drumming before joining Judas Priest. And it was then when KK Downing and Glenn Tipton simply ran into the room and asked him to do that. And they meant exactly that same thing, but on tape, thus fulfilling Scott Travis's second lifelong dream that same year. As to this very day, it is the Painkiller intro, which did not only serve as a perfect introduction of Scott Travis to the Judas Priest family, but also became possibly the most iconic song intro in heavy metal overall.
One more song, Rockin', what do you say? What do you want to hear? What? What? What?
And just like that, Judas Priest were once again complete. They once again were on top, and once again they released an album which became a milestone record for heavy metal overall, loudly and proudly shutting the door of the 1980s era of heavy metal and preparing the foundation for heavy metal's return after the millennium. And none of this would be possible without a lifelong Judas Priest fan from Virginia, who, by the way, celebrates his birthday just 3 days after Painkiller. But anyways, what do you guys personally think about the drummers on Painkiller and about this album overall? Please let us know in the comments. And just FYI, although I did release a special episode on the importance of Painkiller before, which, by the way, if you haven't watched, you should definitely watch after watching this video. This video, talking about Scott Travis's addition to Judas Priest family, is only the first one in the series I've prepared for the 35th anniversary of the legendary album. And in one of the next videos, we will be diving deeper into KK Downing's and Glenn Tipton's solo parts on this album, which, as we all know, are simply insane. So if you're still not subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so to not miss it. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!